Okay, welcome to Session 8, Business Economics. Okay, let's just start the session. So far we have been talking about microeconomics. Good evening, Sumiyako. So far we've been talking about microeconomics. Now we're shifting towards the other concept, which is macroeconomics. We talked about microeconomics, which is individual aspects of the economy, like demand, supply, but macroeconomics is general whole picture. So we want to cover that. So measures a nation's income. So microeconomics is the study of how individual households and firms make decisions and how they interact with one another in markets. So that's what we've been discussing so far. But what is macroeconomics? Macroeconomics is the study of economy as a whole. So the whole picture. I mean, it's always good to have a whole picture and understand the whole picture of economy as well as the microeconomics, which is just like one by one individual aspect. Macroeconomics is the study of economy as a whole. Its goal is to explain the economic changes that affect many households, like firms and markets all together, not just one household, not just one individual, but just all together. Macroeconomics answers questions like the following, like why is average income high in some countries and low in some other countries? So we talk about average income when it's high in some countries and low in other countries. Why do prices rise rapidly in some time periods while they are more stable in other time periods? So we discussed with all these aspects. We want to understand why the average income is like higher in like certain countries compared to other countries, understand the foundation, the reason behind it, the prices when they change and the period for which they change, and production and employment expand in some years and then contract in other years. So basically understanding the economic picture, like when you see the economy as a whole, because we have all these different, we have real estate, we have like production, we have manufacturing, all these just working separately. But we want to be able to understand the whole picture of the economy as a whole. So that's when macroeconomy will come into picture. When judging whether the economy is doing well or poorly, it is natural to look at the total income that everyone in the economy is earning. So the total income in the whole economy is an important factor that we should be able to understand. So for an economy as a whole, income must equal the expenditure because every transaction has a buyer and seller. So for an economy as a whole, income must equal expenditure because every transaction has a buyer and a seller. And every dollar of a spending by some buyer is a dollar of income for some seller. So when you look at the economy as a whole, then you would be looking at two sides. When there is expense on one side, there is the income on the other side, because someone's expense is someone's income. Someone's income is someone else's expense. So that's how you should be able to see things. It's going to change the whole scenario. So every dollar of spending with some buyer is a dollar of income for some seller. So now we get to the concept and topic which is very common. I'm sure you hear that all the time when it comes to economies and understanding economies, or even like analyzing economies in the news. They always talk about something called GDP. What is GDP? GDP is gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is a measure of the income and expenditures of the economy. So total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. So you're talking about the whole thing, the whole production. You're talking about the expenditure, the income. It is the market value of all final goods and services. So not just goods, not just services, goods and services that are produced within a country within a period of time, like GDP over a year. So total amount of products and services that are produced within a country, we call it GDP. So the equality of income expenditures can be illustrated within a circular flow diagram. Look at this circular flow diagram. If you look at it, you'll see the markets for goods and services. Goods and services firms will sell and households will buy, right? That will lead into revenue. Then firms produce and sell goods and services, hire and use factors of production. And then that will lead in wages, rents, and profits. They flow into the markets for factors of production. Then households will sell, and firms will buy, and then it goes to households that buy and consume goods and services, own and sell factors of production. Back again, they spend to the market. So you see, and then the other way around is when markets for goods and services, firms sell, household buys, the goods and services are bought, go to the households, then they create land, the land, labor, capital is there. They go to the factors of production. The factors of production will lead into production of products and services that will be sold to the market. So it's like a two-way relationship. You see, it goes and come back. So that's a two-way relationship between like economy. The measure of gross domestic product, the GDP, is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. So GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. GDP is the market value. Output is valued at market prices. Of all finals, it records only the value of final goods, not immediate goods. So we are talking about final goods, those products and services that are final. And goods and services, it includes both tangible and intangible, like haircuts, householding, doctor visits, all of those are included. So when it's produced, it includes goods and services currently produced, not transactions involving goods and services that are produced in the past. We're talking of those that just currently are produced. And it's within a country. It measures the value of production within the geographical confines of the country. You're talking about the boundaries of the country, not those that are outside of the country. Don't consider that as GDP. GDP is those within the country. In a given period of time, it measures the value of production takes place within a specific interval of time, usually a year or a quarter. And the components of GDP. GDP includes all items produced in the economy and sold legally in the markets. Yes, normally GDP is measured annually, especially with the reports like UN reports is annual GDP. But a lot of times for governments or certain purposes, they will calculate the quarter GDP as well, the quarterly prepared GDP. So it depends. Like for many purposes, normally it goes annual. Sure. What is not counted in GDP? GDP excludes most of the items that are produced and consumed at home that never enter the marketplace. There are those items that are produced and final, but they never enter the marketplace. It excludes items produced and sold illicitly, such as illegal drugs. So again, not those that like secretly are sold. We're talking about those expressly sold in the market, like clearly, outspokenly. You know? GDP is the sum of the following. You have the consumption, you have the investment, you have the government purchases, you have the net exports. So your GDP is the consumption plus investment plus government purchases and plus net exports. The consumption, the spending by the household on goods and services with the exception of purchases of new housing. So by spending your household on goods and services with the exception of purchases of new housing, investment is the spending on capital, equipment, inventories, structures, including new housing. Yeah, they should. They should count drugs as well, because I mean, not illegal drugs, but we're talking about legal drugs. Oh, that's not right. It should not, and I don't think so. Especially in the no, there's no way that they can do that. I mean, unless it's legal. Like let's say in Netherlands, like opiums and drugs are legal, so they can absolutely do that because it's already legal in the market. But in Afghanistan, as far as I know, it's illegal, so there is no way that they can count it in GDP. Unless it's like for medicine purposes, because opium is used sometimes for medicine purposes. Like sometimes doctors prescribe, like even here in the U.S., a lot of times doctors will prescribe for those who are in great deal of pain. They need to use those, so they do that for with the drugs, with the doctor's prescription. So that's a different case. We're talking about like normal market, it doesn't. So it has to be legal for it to be counted as GDP. Investment is spending on capital equipment, inventories, and structures, including new housing. So government purchases, we're talking about spending on goods and services by local, state, and federal government. So government spending is also part of GDP. Those services, local, state, federal government, does not include transfer payments because they are not made in exchange for currently produced goods or services. So not transfer payments, but those goods and services produced by local or federal governments, government agencies. Then net exports is exports minus imports. So for a country to have a positive net exports, they need to have more exports than imports. So sometimes you have negative because if your imports is higher and bigger than your exports, then your value for net exports will be negative, and it will reduce your GDP. That's important. That's why good governments, countries don't like importing a lot, and they need to export more. So look at here. Table 1, GDP and all its components. So gross domestic product, total in billions of dollars per person, percent of total. We have consumption, we have investment, we have government purchases, we have net exports. So this is a GDP component back in 2001 for the U.S. You see, the government purchases was 18%, net exports was -3%. consumption was 69 and investment was 16%. So nominal GDP versus real GDP. Nominal GDP values the production of goods and services at current prices. Real GDP values the production of goods and services at constant prices. So we have current prices and we have constant prices. So an accurate view of the economy requires adjusting nominal to real GDP by using the GDP deflator. So constant GDP, we need to change the nominal to real GDP. Yeah, deflator is for you to take care of. It's like a number. It's a ratio number that helps you to change the nominal to real GDP. It's like you multiply a nominal GDP by a percentage or like a point something, which is a deflator, to bring it down to the real GDP, because your nominal GDP is always higher. So you have to multiply it by a smaller number to change it into a real GDP. So table 2, real and nominal GDP. So price of hot dogs is $1. Price of hamburgers. So when you look at here, the real price is $1, but the nominal price is $3 for hot dogs in different years. You see, like prices change, but the real price should be $1. So 2001, $1 per hot dog, 100 hot dogs, plus $2 per hamburgers times 50 is 200. 2002, $2, 600, and then 1,200. So real GDP. So the base here would be $1. So basically, the real price, as you can see here, in this chart, the base price would be $1 for hot dogs and $2 for hamburger. But the nominal is increasing, right? So for the deflator is whatever you need to divide the nominal to get to your basically base price is called your deflator. So as you can see in the last chart, the base and real price should be $1 for hot dogs and $2 for hamburger. And just by increase of the number sold, you should get to a different number, not by the increase in the price. So the GDP deflator is a measure of the price level calculated as the ratio of nominal times 100. So normally they do it as 100. It tells us the rise in nominal GDP that is attributable to rise in prices rather than rise in the quantities. I mean, the price for real GDP, you should consider the constant price, so that increasing the price is just inflation. It's not because of you're selling more, right? So the GDP deflator is calculated as nominal divided by real times 100, as you can see here. So covering nominal GDP to real, converting nominal to real. So is nominal GDP divided by GDP deflator times 100. Okay? Yeah, a good example would be, you were not in the class, I guess, Mr. Muhammad Aziz. Maybe here is a good example. You see, 2001, we have $1 for hot dogs, $2 for hamburger. So, 2012, we have different prices. And 2002 and 2003, we have different prices. So our base price should be $1 per hot dog and $2 per hamburger. So those extras are increasing prices. So 2002, the nominal price is 600. So if you divide 600 by the GDP deflator times 100, you'll get the real GDP. And probably you don't know what's the nominal and the real GDP. Nominal GDP is the production of goods at the current prices, and real GDP is at their productions or constant prices. So a few slides back, and you missed the first part of the lecture because you were not here, but you can go to the recorded version and basically see that. So calculating the GDP deflator, you see the 2001, the price was as our constant price, so it's 101 times 100. Then 2002, 600 divided by 350, which is the base price, times 100 is 171, and then 2003 is 240. So the real GDP in the United States is actually increasing. The real GDP is what we should count on. The real GDP is how we can find out if our economy is improving, if we are selling more, right? The GDP is best single measure of the economic well-being of a society. So GDP is important, gross domestic product, which is the total of products and services produced within a country within a certain period of time, let's say a year or a quarter, is the most important, is the single measure of economic well-being of a society. GDP per person tells us, though, the income and expenditures of average person in the economy. So higher GDP per person indicates a higher standard of living, and GDP is not a perfect measure of happiness or quality of life. Some things that contribute to well-being are not included in GDP. The value of leisure, the value of clean environment, the value of almost all activity that takes place outside of the market, such as the value of time parents to spend with their children, and value of volunteer work. So GDP does not include everything. So your leisure time, your clean environment, like the time, the quality time families spend together for leisure, like for volunteer work, this is not part of GDP. So these are the aspects that are not included in GDP, but are important in, in a government's well-being. Looking at this chart, you see the real GDP per person, life expectancy, and adult literacy. You see, United States life expectancy is 77. This is from the year 2000, like 1999. Literacy 99%. We have Japan, we have Germany. All those. This is sort of outdated. Summary, because every transaction has a buyer and a seller. The total expenditure in the economy must equal the total income in the economy. Then we talk about gross domestic product. It measures an economy's total household expenditure on newly produced goods and services, and the total income earned from production of these goods and services. So GDP is the market value of final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. GDP is divided among four components of expenditure: consumption, investment, government purchases, and net exports. And net exports was exports minus imports. Nominal GDP uses current prices to value the economy's production. real GDP uses constant base year price to value the economy's production of goods and services. GDP deflator, though, is calculated from the ratio of the nominal to real GDP, which is the measure of level of prices in the economy. GDP is a good measure of economic well-being because people prefer a higher to lower income. It is not a perfect measure of well-being because some things like leisure time and clean environment or volunteer work is not measured in calculating GDP. Okay, so that's the end of the topic we want to talk about today. Before I give you the task for today, and then I want to show you a video. Are there any questions? So since there is no question, I want you guys, like two of you, since nobody else is in the class, I want you to tell me, explain the difference between micro and macroeconomics and how they are related to calculating GDP. Okay, the question is, explain micro and macroeconomics and how they are related to micro and macroeconomics. So take a few moments. Do you understand the question? Is it clear?
Good evening, sir. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
I just want to say something about this question. Is it okay, or should we write?
Yeah, of course, please, yes.
Yes, as you explained, also it is on the monitor of the computer. I can see, but from my understanding, microeconomics. It's micro means small. Economics is the economy of. If we think of microeconomics, it's a microeconomics economy or of the households, individuals, or smaller markets, we can say, that is interacted in a smaller society or small places. But when we talk about macro, which means big, macroeconomics, economy of the wider area or whole country, or even maybe all the universe, or all all the Earth, the economy. As now we say, the Earth is a global village, and the economy is. We see the one investments in different countries of the world, regions, regional corporations, or we see different economies, like we have in our Southeast Asian countries, SARC, and there are European Union, and the other. These are the issues of macroeconomics that deals with not smaller places, but it deals with major areas. But the microeconomics is contributing to the macroeconomics. As we see an example, the parents and the children make a family, and then the family makes society, and the society makes a bigger society, which is like a country, and then this big country makes part of the whole world, the earth. Like this one, the microeconomics is a small bits and pieces of parts of the macroeconomics that at the end they make the macroeconomics, and they are both contributing to the GDP because as we talked about GDP, about investments, about consumptions, about incomes, about exports and imports. These all things are in calculating or are coming from this microeconomics and macroeconomics, which is contributing to GDP as a whole when we come at the end and measure it. So, from my understanding, GDP is an issue of macroeconomics, but since microeconomics is contributing to that, this is also relating to the microeconomics and both the macroeconomics. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good. Yeah, very good explanation. Microeconomics, just to give a little bit of extra explanation on what you said. Micro is just the individual parts of macro. So micro is like detailed and small parts that like all together they don't create the macro. But macro is the whole economy, as you explained. And then both of them, as correctly as you mentioned, yes, they contribute to GDP, like individuals, or when they're producing products or services, or they buy, they're actually part of the macro, and all together they're either producing services or products, and then that's because it's within the year and because it's in the market, it will increase the GDP. So very good, Mr. Mohammad Aziz. We have your answer here. Macroeconomics, the branch of the economics that analyzes the market behavior of individual consumers and firms. Almost. With the interaction between the individual buyer and sellers and the fact. Yes, okay, that's good for micro. And then how about macroeconomics, Mr. Mohammad? And macroeconomics can be best understood in the large picture, big picture together. Okay, yes, very good. And how do they contribute to GDP? What's the relationship of micro and macroeconomics and GDP? Yes, but how do you explain it? Okay, so make sure you email it to me. Okay, no problem. Let me go ahead and show you this this lecture from MIT on microeconomics and macroeconomics. So what I will show you, I will show you first microeconomics part, and then we'll focus on macroeconomics part as the following. Okay, let's watch this one first. Okay. Yes, I was just preparing it. Okay, it's right here. So
To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseWare at ocw.mit.edu.
So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about what the heck this course is. What is microeconomics? What are you going to be learning in this course? And just sort of set us up for the semester. Okay, so basically, microeconomics is all about scarcity. It's all about how individuals and firms make decisions given that we live in a world of scarcity. Scarcity is key because basically what we're going to learn about this semester in various shapes and forms is a lot of different types of constrained optimization. We're going to learn a lot about different ways that individuals make choices in a world of scarcity, okay? That is, this course is going to be about trade-offs. Given scarce resources, how do individuals and firms trade off different alternatives to make themselves as well off as possible? That's why economics is called the dismal science. Economics is called the dismal science because we are not about everyone have everything. We're always people saying, no, you can't have everything. You have to make a trade-off, okay? You have to give up X to get Y, and that's why people don't like this, okay? Because that's what we call the dismal science, because we're always pointing out the trade-offs that people face. Now, some may call it dismal, but I call it fun, and that may be because of my MIT training. As I said, I was an undergraduate here. In fact, MIT is the perfect place to teach microeconomics because this whole institute is about engineering solutions, which are really ultimately about constrained optimization. Indeed, what's the best example in the world we have of this is the 270 contest, right? You're given a set of pile of junk. You've got to build something that does something else. That's an exercise in constrained optimization. All engineering is really constrained optimization. How do you take the resource you're given and do the best job building something? And that's really what microeconomics is. Just like 270 is not a dismal contest, microeconomics is not to me a dismal science. You can think of this course like 270, but instead of building robots, we're running people's lives. Okay, that's kind of the way I like to think about this course. Instead of trying to decide how we can move a ping pong ball across the table, we're trying to decide how people make the decisions to consume and firms make the decisions to produce. That's basically what's going to go on in this class. Okay, and that's why basically modern microeconomics was founded at MIT in the 1950s by Paul Samuelson, the father of modern economics, was a professor here, and he basically founded the field. He basically introduced mathematics to economics. And through teaching this course, 1401, 50, 60 years ago, actually developed the field that we now study. Now, what we're going to do in this class is focus on two types of actors in the economy: consumers and producers. Consumers and producers, okay? And we are going to build models of how consumers and producers behave. Now, technically, a model is going to be a description of any relationship between two or more economic variables. Okay, that's a model, description of any relationship between two or more economic variables. The trick with economics, and the reason many of you will be frustrated during this semester, is unlike modeling the relationship between, say, energy and mass, these models are never precise. They are never accurate to the 10th decimal. Okay. This is not a precise scientific relationship with modeling. We'll be making a number of simplifying assumptions that allow us to capture the main tendencies in the data, that allow us to capture the main insights into how individuals make consumption decisions and how firms make production decisions. But it's not going to be as clean and precise as the kind of proofs you're going to be doing in some of your other classes in freshman and sophomore year. Okay? So basically, we have a trade-off with these simplifying assumptions. On the one hand, obviously we want a model that can explain reality as much as possible. If a model can't explain reality, it's not useful. On the other hand, we need a model that's tractable, a model that I can teach you in a lecture or less. Okay? And basically, what we do is we make a lot of simplifying assumptions in this class to make those models work. And yet, what we'll find is, despite these assumptions, we'll come up with incredibly powerful predictions of how consumers and producers behave. So as consumers, what we're going to do is we're going to say that consumers are constrained by their limited wealth, or what we'll call their budget constraint. And subject to that constraint, they choose the set of goods that makes them as well off as possible. Okay, it's what we're going to call utility maximization. We'll say the consumers maximize their utility. Consumers are going to maximize utility subject to a budget constraint. That's going to be what we're going to develop the consumer decision. We're going to have some utility function, which is going to be a model of their preferences. Okay. So I'm going to propose to take everything you love in life and write it down as a U function. Okay. Then I propose to take all the resources at your disposal, write them down as a budget constraint, and then I just do constraint maximization to solve for how you make decisions. Firms, on the other hand, are going to maximize profits. Firms are going to maximize profits. Their goal is to make as much profit as possible, to earn as much money as possible. Okay? However, that's going to be subject to both the demands of consumers. This is going to be, we get to firms, it's a lot harder. Subject to both consumer demand and input costs. So firms have to consider, consumers have to consider, look, what does stuff cost? What do I like? I'll make my decision. Firms are a little more complicated. They've got to consider what do consumers want and how do I make what they want. They've got to consider both both the output side, what are consumers going to want me to make, and what's it going to cost me to produce that good, and how do I combine those to make the most profits. Okay? So from these assumptions, we will be able to answer the three fundamental questions of microeconomics. Okay? The three fundamental questions of microeconomics will be what goods and services should be produced, what goods and services should be produced, how to produce those goods and services, and who gets the goods and services. What goods and services get produced, how to produce those goods and services, and who gets them. And what's amazing, we'll learn in this course, is that all three of these questions, the three fundamental questions that drive our entire economy, are all solved through the role of one key state variable, which is prices. Prices in the economy will resolve all of these problems. Okay? Consumers and firms will interact in a market. They'll interact in a marketplace. And out of that marketplace will emerge a set of prices in a way we'll describe. And those prices will allow firms and consumers to make the relevant decisions. Okay? So let me just give you one, and we're going to do all this rigorously throughout the semester. Let me just start with one casual example. Okay? Let's think about the development of the iPod. Okay? Let's cast our minds way back, way back to the development of the iPod. Okay? Now, when the iPod, when Apple was thinking about making the iPod, they had to ask, would consumers want this? So consumers had to decide, given their limited resources, given the fact that they were buying a certain set of things, would they be willing to forsake some things they were already doing to spend the money on the iPod? Okay, with a non-trivial amount of money. Would they be willing to forsake things they're already doing, okay, to spend on the iPod? And clearly they were. Clearly consumers were willing to spend money, to spend a lot of money to get an iPod. They were originally, what, $300 back, you know, when $300 meant something. Okay, so basically, so what the firm will do is they'll say, okay, we get a signal from the consumer that they're willing to pay money to get the iPod. They're willing to pay a high price to get the iPod. Now, the firm will say, well, should we make iPods? Well, that will depend on what it costs to make them. So we have to then assess what are the inputs that we'll need to make an iPod. Well, to do that, we have to look at the prices of the various inputs that we'll need, of the chip and the metal and all the other stuff that goes into the iPod. Okay, so they can shop across different countries for different kinds of chips. They can look at different kinds of monitors, etc. But once again, what they'll do is they'll use the prices of those different inputs to decide how to produce the iPod. So whether to produce the iPod will depend on the price people are willing to pay for it. How to make the iPod will depend on the prices that firms have to pay for the chip and the casing and all the other things that go into the iPod. Okay? And then finally, who's going to get the iPod? Well, they're going to make a certain amount. What's the side who gets them? Well, the person who gets them are the people who are willing to pay the price that Apple decides to charge. Some people are willing to pay that price. They're going to get an iPod. Some people are not willing to pay that price. They will not get an iPod. So the price in the market will ultimately decide who gets the iPod as well. Okay? So basically, prices will determine what gets produced, how it's produced, and who gets the goods that are produced. Okay? Of course, this is a very, very simplified example, as you can already tell. There are lots of cases where prices don't decide these things. So my favorite example is the fact that there are lines for hours to get tickets to see a Lady Gaga concert. Okay? Now, if it's really true that prices determine everything, we shouldn't see lines. It should just be that those who are willing to pay the most to see Lady Gaga should, those willing to see the most to get a Lady Gaga should get the tickets. Those who aren't willing to pay shouldn't get the tickets. Why should there be a line? Not to mention the fact that people shouldn't be willing to pay anything, but that's a different issue. That's a taste issue. We'll come to taste later. Okay? So basically, clearly, this is not working perfectly. If the world worked in the way I just described, then what should happen is there should be essentially an auction, and whoever's willing to pay the most for Lady Gaga tickets would get them, and whoever's not willing to pay wouldn't. It wouldn't involve any waiting in line or other things. Now, what's very interesting is we've actually seen an evolution from my youth to your youth towards the economic model. When I was a kid, if you wanted, so then it was Cars tickets, okay, to date myself, okay, you had to go and camp out at 3 in the morning outside the store where they're selling them to get the tickets. Now, of course, you don't do that anymore. Now you go on StubHub or Ticketmaster or these other secondary sellers, and there are prices that determine it. So increasingly, how many people how many people have waited online to get a concert ticket? Okay, that's amazing. So if I asked this question 30 years ago, 90% of the hands would have gone up. Okay, so what that means is the price mechanism has started to be used, has replaced the line mechanism as a way to allocate those tickets, and we see prices working. That wasn't true. There wasn't StubHub. These weren't these secondary ticket sellers 30 years ago. You had to wait in line to get the tickets. Now, so that's basically sort of an overview about sort of an example of how we think about the role of prices. Now, let me draw a couple of important distinctions, terms I'm going to use this semester that I want you to be comfortable with. Okay? The first distinction I want to draw is between theoretical versus empirical economics. Theoretical versus empirical economics. Okay. Theoretical economics is the process of building models to explain the world. Okay. Empirical economics is the process of testing those models to see how good a job they do in explaining the world. Okay? We could all make up a model. Okay? Anybody who has math skills can make up a model, but it doesn't do any good unless it's actually doing something to explain the world. And so basically, what we want to do, the goal of theoretical economics is essentially to build a model that has some testable predictions. To build a model that says, look, here's my simplified model of how consumers decide whether or not to buy an iPod. Okay, I have a model of that I've built theoretically. Well, that has some testable predictions, and the role of empirical economics is to gather the data and go and test them using statistical methods, specifically, typically regression analysis of the kind you learn about in advanced statistics. Okay, so basically, what we're going to do is we're going to mostly, 95% of this course will be about theoretical economics this semester. It'll be about understanding how economists develop the models to model how consumers and firms behave. But I will try to talk somewhat about empirical economics and what data we can bring to bear to understand whether or not these models explain the world. Okay? The other distinction that's very important is positive versus normative economics. Positive versus normative economics. Okay? And this is the distinction between the way things are, which is positive economics, and the way things should be, which is normative economics. The distinction between the way things are and the way things should be. Okay? So let's consider a great example of microeconomics at work, which is auctions on eBay. Okay? Auctions on eBay, economists love studying auctions on eBay because it's a textbook example of what we call a perfectly competitive market, which is what we'll focus on this semester. A perfectly competitive market, okay? And by that we mean that basically by that we mean that producers in this market offer up their good to a wide range of consumers, okay? A number of producers offer up their goods to a wide range of consumers, okay? And the consumers bid up the price until the person with the highest value for the good gets it. So price serves exactly the signal it should in allocating goods, okay? So really, eBay is really sort of about this third thing of who gets the good, okay? I offer my, you know, my alarm clock or whatever on eBay, okay? And then people bid on that. Whoever values that the most, that rare John Gruber alarm clock the most, they get it, okay? So it's a perfect textbook example, okay? And basically, because on eBay, the price is used, or now with also StubHub and concert tickets, the price is used to allocate the good to the person who wants it the most, okay? Now, a recent example of an auction eBay got a lot of attention, not so recent anymore, a couple of years ago. Someone tried to auction their kidney on eBay, okay? Someone offered their kidney for auction on eBay. They said, I have 2 kidneys, I only need 1, so I'm going to auction my kidney. You pay for me to fly to wherever you need my kidney and the operation, they take it out and they give it to you, and that's the way it goes. So what happened was, this person offered their kidney and they said the starting price will be $25,000. They didn't do a buy it now. They said the starting price will be $25,000, and the bidding went on. The price got to $5 million before eBay shut it down. eBay shut the auction down, and eBay said, no, in fact, you can't do this. Now, there's 2 questions here. The first is, why did the price of the kidney go so high? That's the positive question. The positive question is, why did the price of the kidney on eBay get so high? And here, we'll talk, and you'll learn more starting Friday, about the twin forces of supply and demand. The twin forces that drive the economy of supply and demand. And you'll talk more rigorously about these on Friday. Basically, they're what they sound like. Demand is how much someone wants something. Supply is how much of it there is to have. And the intuition is unsurprising. Okay, the more that there's demand for a good, the higher will be the upward pressure on prices. The more people want a good, the higher price will go. And the less supply there is of a good, also the higher prices will go. So if everybody wants something but it's common, the price will be low. And if no one wants something but it's uncommon, the price will still be low, and vice versa. In fact, the best sort of the development of the modern supply-demand framework was from Adam Smith, the sort of so-called first economist who wrote The Wealth of Nations, 1776, which is sort of viewed as the kind of first serious book about economics. And he posed what he called the water-diamond paradox. What Smith said in that book is, look, it's clear water is the most important thing in life. We can't live without water. And diamonds are completely irrelevant to life. Diamond, you can live plenty of time without a diamond. And yet the price of diamonds is astronomical and water is free. How can this be? How can it be that water, which is so much of a fundamental building block of our life, is so much cheaper than diamonds, which are not? And the answer, of course, is that so far you've only considered demand and not supply. Yes, it's true the demand for water is much higher than demand for diamonds, but the supply is even larger. So that basically, yes, it's true that while water should be worth more, in fact, in the end, the price of water is much lower because the twin force of demand and supply. The demand is higher, but the supply is much higher. The price ends up lower, and that was his diamond water paradox. Okay. Well, in this case, it's a similar thing. What's the demand? What's the demand for a kidney? The term demand for a kidney is going to be the fact that you die without it. Okay? If you have no kidney, if you're in kidney failure, okay, you'll die without it. So basically, we'll determine is people will spend all their wealth, as much money as they can have to get a kidney. Okay, so the demand will be quite high. The supply will be quite low. Sadly, not many people are willing to be organ donors. Relatively, a lot of people aren't in good situations to be organ donors. Okay? As a result, the supply is much lower than the demand. So you have a situation with a high demand, a low supply, and the price went through the roof. That's the positive analysis. Okay? So we can understand pretty intuitively, we don't need this course to understand why the price went up. Okay? It's just the twin powers of demand and supply. But what about the normative question, which is, should this sale be allowed? should eBay have allowed this sale to happen? eBay at $5 million cut it off and then passed the rule saying you can't auction your body parts on eBay. Okay, should they have done that? That's the normative question. That's where economics is really interesting, which is, you're all smart enough to figure out why the price went up. But this is where it gets interesting, is should people have been able to auction their kidney on eBay? On the one hand, many people in this country die for want of a body part, okay? Thousands to hundreds of thousands of people die every year waiting for a transplant, okay? If someone's incredibly rich and they want a body part, which to me is surplus, because I have 2 kidneys, why shouldn't they be allowed to buy it from me? Okay, I'm better off because they can pay me a ton of money. Okay, they're better off because they live. So just describe a transaction that makes both parties better off. Why shouldn't that be allowed to happen? So you tell me. Does anyone argue? Does everyone think eBay was wrong? Yes, go ahead. Okay, so person, you mean the person who, what do you mean the person who doesn't know so much? Right, so what you're assuming is, let's say that if I hadn't done the auction on eBay, I would have just given my kidney away to the transplant center. Then that's one less kidney to go to the transplant center. And that means the rich guy gets the kidney and someone else implicitly doesn't. That's a trade-off. They just described the trade-off. The trade-off is that basically now we've allocated the kidney away from the poor person to the rich person. Now, but why do we care about that? I mean, they both, one person dies and the person lives. Why do we care? Yeah.
Some sort of case of very condition, like there might be someone who's poor who would get a kidney to go into a transplant association because they would die in a couple of days without it. Whereas the rich person might just be able to afford it, and it might make their life more convenient, but they might not be in any more.
It would be lesser.
Yeah.
So basically, that's right. So one reason we might care is because we think that kidneys should be allocated on the basis of who needs it the most. Okay. So the great example of this, of course, was Mickey Mantle with a liver transplant. Mickey Mantle, famous ball player, raging alcoholic, who had liver failure because he basically drank himself to death and jumped the queue and got a liver above a lot of people, and then he kept drinking and killed himself and wasted the liver he got. Okay. So basically, you can think that doesn't make sense. We should get the people who need the most to really be the most good in terms of increasing their life. Okay, but let's actually, okay, so that's a good, so we've got the substitution point. Okay, let's go back to the substitution point though. Tell me a situation in which that's wrong. Because someone tell me a situation in which in fact that's not a valid point. Yeah.
Exactly.
You're assuming that the guy didn't sell it and give it away. But in fact, if it's sell it or keep it, then there's no trade-off. And similar here, it's not like it'll go to, if it's sell it or keep it, then you might as well let the rich guy get it. Or is there another argument? Is there another reason why you might not want this to happen? Yeah. Illegal. Yeah. So the other reason could be that we don't trust people to make good decisions when money's involved. That we think that, gee, if it's really true I get a couple $1 million for a kidney, I might give mine up even if I haven't really thought through the ramifications of doing so. Even if there's a risk to the surgery, there's a risk that my other kidney will then fail, then I'll be screwed. Okay? So basically, we might have a paternalistic attitude that will lead us to not want to allow people to engage in this kind of risky behavior. Yeah.
There'll be some legal ramifications associated with that. If someone sells their kidney and then their other kidney fails, they might then blame eBay.
That's right. There could also be, but let's leave the lawyers out of this. Okay, I don't like lawyers. We're going to rag on lawyers this semester. We're going to leave the lawyers out of this. But in any case, you're right. That's sort of ramification of the same thing. So we've talked about the fact that there's substitution. We've talked about the fact that it's not allocated to those who need it the most. We've talked about the fact that people may be making bad decisions in doing this. But there's another factor as well, which is we may just as a society feel it's unfair that rich people can get things poor people can't. There may be a pure equity component here, okay, which is simply that we as society value equality, value income inequality, and we think people should not have an extra shot at getting a resource just because they're rich. Now, that is a very deep and hard concept and we'll spend a couple lectures talking about equity towards the end of the semester. By and large, we won't consider it, okay? But it turns out to be behind much of what we'll discuss, okay, in much of what we'll discuss this semester and much of what goes on in economics, okay? Just take a look at the debate that's going on right now in terms of President Obama trying to decide whether or not to extend tax cuts to wealthy individuals in the U.S., okay? Some people argue that allowing those tax cuts would promote the economy, okay? But others argue it's unfair for rich people to get tax breaks. And that fairness argument matters a lot in terms of driving the kinds of economic policy decisions, the kind of economic decisions we need to make. So this semester, we're going to focus a lot on efficiency and optimization and how to get resources from the right to the right place. But you have to remember behind a lot of this is deep normative issues about what should be happening, how should the economy function, and in particular, how should we think about these kind of equity issues that are so important. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about why micro is not just an abstract concept for things like, you might say, oh, this is all pretty funny, and it's like, you know, selling kidneys on eBay and tax cuts for the rich, and why do I care? Okay? Well, you care because literally every decision you make is made through the kind of framework we're going to think about this semester. Okay? Now, different decisions may follow our models more closely and less closely. But there is not an economic decision, okay? There's not, sorry, go back up. There's not a decision that people have made, the economists haven't tried to model. From whether to use iPods to how many times to have sex each week, okay? These are all things economists have tried to model with varying degrees of success, okay? And these are, because the economists think that these all come from the same decision theoretic framework that we can discuss. Let's talk about a simple example from this course. Your decision of whether or not to buy the textbook. There's a textbook, and what's it cost? $140 bucks? What's it cost? Anyone know?
Amazon is 180. What? Amazon is 180.
Okay.
135.
So $130 for Professor Perloff out of Berkeley. He doesn't get it all. I wrote a textbook too. He gets a small share. Okay. So so you have to decide. Now, has anyone bought a used version of the 4th edition? Well, it's the 5th edition now. Has anyone bought a used version of the 4th edition? Does anyone know what the used price is? You can be honest. I don't care. So 85. So you've got to decide. So let's say you can buy the previous edition, the 4th edition for 85, or the current edition for 130. Okay? You've got to make that decision. Okay? How do you make that decision? Well, you may think, gee, I just make the decision, and it's not really about microeconomics, but it is. We're going to model how you think about a decision like that. Well, how do you think about a decision like that? Well, the first thing you consider is your preferences. How much are you willing to take a chance that there's new stuff in the 5th edition that you need to know? Okay? If the 5th edition was identical to the 4th edition, then you'd be an idiot to not just buy the used 4th edition. But it's not. Textbook writers are smart. They update their book. Okay? So basically, the 5th edition is updated. There's new things in it. So you have to ask yourself, what are the odds that I need some of the new information in the 5th edition of the 4th edition? And in thinking about that, you're going to think about your preferences. In particular, are you very risk averse? Are you afraid to take a chance? Or are you risk loving? Are you willing to take a chance? Okay? That's one side of the equation. If you're someone that says, you know, I will not take a chance in life, I just have to make sure I learn the most possible from this course, then you're going to want that new edition. If you're someone that says, you know what, screw it, I'll figure it out later, I'm going to the lectures, I don't care, okay, then you might not want it that much. So that's the first factor. It's going to be your preferences, in particular how much you're willing to take a risk that you need this 5th edition. The second factor is going to be your constraint, how much money you have. Okay, the more money you have, the more you're willing, or more relevant, perhaps your parents have, the more willing you are to go ahead and buy that new edition. The less money you have, the less willing you are. Okay? So basically, it's going to depend on whether you're paying or your parents are paying, in which case, what the hell, you must have to buy the 5th edition. Okay? And then finally, you're going to take these preferences and this constraint, your preferences and your resources, and go to the market and look at what does the market tell me the difference is. So you're going to say, here's how much I kind of care about 5th versus 4th edition. Here's the resources I have. Now I'll go to the market and say, aha, there's a $55 difference, a $45 difference between these two editions. So now I will solve that constrained optimization problem. And I will decide whether I want to get that book. You might be thinking to yourself, this is stupid. I never think about it that way. But the key point is you don't have to think about it exactly that way. There's a famous example in economics of what's called the as-if principle. I don't know if kids still say something like that, as-if. So it's the as-if principle, okay? And basis from Milton Friedman, the famous economist from Chicago, who said, look, when you're playing pool, technically you could compute the optimal angles of which to shoot the ball every single time to get the appropriate bounce to get the ball, then you could do the mathematics and compute it. But professional pool players are not in this class with you, let me say that, okay? They're not guys who are able to do that computation. They just know how to hit the ball to get the same outcome they would get if they mathematically solved for the optimal trajectory to hit the ball, okay? They behave as if they solved the constrained optimization problem. And your decision when you buy this book, you may not think it through. The very framework that I just laid out very heuristically will lay out more rigorously this semester. But you're going to behave as if you do, because those facts are in your mind, you'll be thinking about it when you make that decision. So while you may feel the models we learn in this course are rather abstract, don't really explain how you behave on an everyday basis, you're going to behave as if those models are really applying to you. And if you think about, over the next 2 days, think about the decisions you make. From should I bring an umbrella today, it looks like rain. Well, on the one hand, I might lose it, it's a pain to carry. On the other hand, how much do I care about getting wet? That's a constrained optimization decision. To, should I have an extra drink at a party Friday night? On the one hand, I might, that could have some pros and cons. Okay, these are all decisions, constrained optimization decisions you're going to make. They're going to affect your life. And we'll learn this semester about how you make them and how we model, how economists can use what we learn about that to understand the function of the economy. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. One other announcement. There will almost always, there will in general be handouts every lecture. I'm not going to do PowerPoint and do handouts. So when you come in every lecture, please look at the back banister. So typically, not today, but typically there'll be handouts that you'll need to follow along with in class. So remember, go to section on Friday. First problem set will be posted on Friday, and it will be due in section the Friday after. And I'll see you all back here on Monday, next Monday.
Okay. So that was a nice explanation of microeconomics. Next session, well, I'll show you another video on macroeconomics. So it will cover that. It was just a good wrap-up of all we covered this semester, actually. Yes, it's MIT professor explaining microeconomics, very, very useful, explaining all those concepts in very brief explanation. Next session I'll show you macroeconomics, but before that I wanted to tell you about next session. Next session, what we will do, I expect you guys, each and every one of you, do a single presentation. So you remember beginning of the session I asked you guys to do a presentation. So every one of you will be presenting a topic, whatever you want, on business economics. It could be macroeconomics. It could be your own project that you were successful basically using whatever topics in economics that we talked about, or it could be even whatever you want to do in the future using any of these topics that we have covered in the class that is going to help your business, your career, your work. So you will have 5 minutes. 5 minutes to make a presentation. You can use PowerPoint slides or whatever, and talk about whatever you want to talk about. So you have 5 minutes and then probably a couple of minutes for question and answer. So be prepared for that. When I send you the slides for today, I will also explain that in my email for you, so you have some idea of what's going on. So that's for that. And then also next session, I will give you your final project's details. So what I want from you as final project. So that you will have 3 weeks from next week that I tell you to submit it to me by email. So next session, make sure you're in a class. You're going to cover the your presentations, talk about your final project, and also continue with the next chapter. Watch a video on macroeconomics, and you know, take it from there. Any questions? Any questions or comments before we you know, wrap up? Okay, so so far we have covered most of the topics in the class, and we are only left with the final part of macroeconomics, which we'll be covering in the next 2 sessions, and also some brief overview of what we have talked about in the class. So that will be pretty much it. But before we go there, maybe I can just show you a very small print of macroeconomics. This will be only a few minutes. Okay. So let's see this small clip on macroeconomics, and then we can wrap up the class.
Share something with you that I don't tell just anyone. When I first took macroeconomics, I hated it. No, really. Look, here's an example why. I would come to class on Monday and scribble furiously as the professor lectured. Today, we're doing aggregate supply, a relationship between the price level and the GDP. Wednesday, I come to class and scribble furiously. Today, we're talking about the aggregate supply, a relationship between the price level and the GDP. Then Friday, I show up and scribble some more. Today, we're talking about aggregate supply, a relationship between price level and the GDP. Exam time comes around, I pull out my notes to study, and this is what I see. Will the real aggregate supply please stand up? Which version is correct? What I came to learn later in my academic career is that each of these views has been correct at some point in time. After all, what is a model supposed to do? It's supposed to help me observe, understand, and make predictions about economic behavior. At different points in time, if you looked out your window at the economy, you would have seen one of these 3 versions of the aggregate supply. Let's go back to the late 1800s, which, interestingly enough, was a lot like the late 1900s. The economy was operating at full capacity, factories in use, fully employed labor, production humming along. When this is the case, that the economy is at full capacity or full employment, the society is at its potential GDP. Even if demand should rise, there aren't any more resources, so you wouldn't be able to get any more output, just inflation. This is why the classical model depicts the aggregate supply as a vertical line at potential or full employment GDP. The classical model fell out of favor when it no longer accurately described economic behavior, namely during the Great Depression. John Maynard Keynes came along and observed that clearly, with unemployment 25% or higher for a sustained period, we were not operating at our potential. In fact, Keynes argued that we had so much unused capacity and so many unused resources that if aggregate demand were to increase, we could increase GDP without seeing any inflation whatsoever. The Keynesian model of aggregate supply is horizontal. Of course, for the most part, we see that increased GDP is accompanied by some inflation. This is the intermediate model of aggregate supply. Which one is correct? Keynesian, intermediate, or classical? Well,
Oh, well, just to do a brief explanation, aggregate supply is the total supplies, like all these individual supplies that we have for all these different households. When we add them all together, we will have aggregate supply, and aggregate demand is the addition of all the demands. It will give us a one final demand curve, and it's called aggregate demand. So just to explain.
As I said, at some point in time, each of these viewpoints has been correct. Really, they're all smaller pieces of a larger picture. At very low levels of GDP, where there are a lot of unused resources, we see the Keynesian model. At full employment, where we're operating at full potential, we see the classical portion. And in the middle, where responding to increased aggregate demand means an increase in GDP and an increase in prices, we're in the intermediate range. Over the years, as one model falls into disfavor and another takes its place, invariably, some academic who likes the old model will come up with a new, more updated version to make the old model more attractive. Hence, new classical economists and new Keynesian economists. Take the original classical model, for example. In the original version, the economy was always at its potential. Well, of course, you don't have to wait long to show that this is not the way the world behaves. Sometimes we're at full employment, but often we're not. Since it did not accurately describe the way the economy works, the classical model fell out of favor. Sometime later, however, the new classical model emerged. Okay, so we're not always at our potential, but when we're not at that level, it's only for short time periods because the economy self-adjusts over time to get back to its full employment level. The story goes something like this. What if we aren't operating at natural real GDP, i.e. the full employment level or our potential? If our macroeconomic equilibrium is Q star, and Q star falls short of our potential, then Q star is less than the natural real GDP, and we have what's called a recessionary gap. What this means is that right now, at Q star, our actual unemployment level is higher than the natural rate of unemployment, so we currently have a surplus of labor standing around. In a free market for anything, even if that thing is labor, a surplus will correct itself as price falls. In this case, the price of labor, or the wage, falls. As labor gets cheaper, employers hire more labor, and aggregate supply shifts to the right. How far? Well, until the labor surplus disappears, that is, until we're at full employment or at our potential GDP. The weak spot in this argument is the flexibility of wages. Will wages fall as a consequence of higher unemployment? If not, the aggregate supply never adjusts. And what if Q star, our equilibrium or actual GDP, is greater than potential GDP? This is referred to as an inflationary gap. Remember, full employment level isn't actually zero unemployment, so it is possible to dip below this level. If our macroeconomic equilibrium GDP is Q star, and Q star is higher than our potential, then Q star is greater than the natural real GDP. What this means is that right now at Q star, the actual unemployment rate is lower than the natural rate of unemployment, also known as the full employment rate, so that we currently have a labor shortage. Any shortage in a free market will correct itself via rising prices, so the price of labor, or wage, will increase. As labor gets more expensive, the aggregate supply falls. How much will it shift? Aggregate supply will stop moving when there's no longer a labor shortage, that is, when the macroeconomic equilibrium is at our potential. Time to think. For the self-adjusting model to work, wages and prices have to be flexible. Are wages completely free to increase? Are they completely free to decrease? The reason that I bring up the different schools of economic thought, Keynesian and classical, is that they have a direct impact on economic policy recommendations. For example, suppose the economy is in a recessionary gap and you're a classical or a new classical economist. You believe that the economy can fix itself. What role do you recommend for the government? Should it be active and try to help the economy along, or just leave things alone? Now, what if you're a Keynesian or a new Keynesian economist? You do not believe that the economy will self-adjust. If there's a recessionary gap, the economy will remain stuck in a recessionary gap. What role do you recommend for the government, hands-on or non-interventionist? Next time, fiscal policy.
Okay, so That was a brief like introduction for the next lecture also, and basically we will cover more on macroeconomics. So that was an intro, and also cover GDP relationship with aggregate supply and demand. So yeah, so that's the end of the class for today. Thank you everyone. Have a beautiful week, and I'll see you next week.